The kid hit the ground face first on a sidewalk in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and the man who shoved him didn't even break stride. Just kept walking, boots scraping concrete, like pushing a 12-year-old into the pavement was the same as stepping over a crack. The boy's chin split open on impact, blood running down his neck and soaking into a shirt 3 sizes too big that used to be white. What happened in the next 6 months would become Fort Bragg legend, a story whispered about for decades in the teams, in the barracks, in every dive bar within 20 miles of the base. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. The man who shoved the kid was named Dale Rickers. Big guy. Worked odd jobs around town, mostly collecting debts for people who didn't file tax returns. He had hands that looked like catcher's mitts and a reputation for solving problems the fast way. The boy on the ground was named Marcus Webb, and he weighed maybe 80 pounds soaking wet. Marcus scrambled to his knees, palms bleeding, and watched Dale disappear around the corner of a pawn shop on Bragg Boulevard. He didn't cry. Believe me, that detail matters later. Marcus picked himself up and pressed his shirt sleeve against his chin. Blood came through the fabric fast. He stood there on that sidewalk at 4 in the afternoon, cars passing, people glancing and looking away, and he did the math in his head. He couldn't go to the ER. No insurance. No parent to sign anything. His mother had been gone for 11 days this time, and the last place she'd left him was a motel room on Yadkin Road that he'd been kicked out of 3 days ago when the weekly rate expired. He'd been sleeping behind the Dollar General, in a spot between the dumpster and the fence where the security cameras didn't reach. He knew because he'd checked. He started walking, no direction, just moving because standing still meant people asked questions, and questions meant someone called Child Services, and Child Services meant a group home, and Marcus had run from 2 of those already. He'd rather bleed. He walked for 40 minutes. The bleeding slowed. His chin throbbed with every heartbeat. He crossed the street near a strip mall and sat down on a bench outside a barber shop that had closed for the day. That's when the door next to the barber shop opened, and a man walked out. The man was medium height, medium build. Brown hair cut close. Nothing about him screamed dangerous. He wore a plain grey t-shirt, jeans, running shoes, no tattoos showing. No jewelry. He carried a small paper bag from the supplement store next door. He looked like an accountant who worked out. Get this. That man was Master Sergeant Jake Creswell, and he'd spent the last 14 years in the unit. Delta Force. The kind of guy whose real job description doesn't show up on any official paperwork. Jake saw the kid, saw the blood, saw the shirt, saw the way Marcus was sitting, back against the wall, eyes scanning the parking lot, feet flat on the ground, knees up, ready to run. Jake had seen that posture in villages in Afghanistan, in alleyways in Iraq, in places where kids learned early that sitting with your back exposed was how you got hurt. Jake stopped walking. He stood 6 feet away and didn't come closer. "You need a hospital," Jake said. Marcus shook his head. "I'm good." Jake set his paper bag down on the bench across from the boy. He crouched, keeping his hands visible. A habit from years of approaching people who had every reason not to trust a stranger. "That chin needs stitches. 3 at least." "I said I'm good." Marcus pulled his knees tighter. Jake nodded slowly. He didn't push. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a pack of tissues, the kind you buy at a gas station. He set them on the bench next to Marcus, then stood up and took a step back. "Those are clean. Pressure on the wound. Keep it there." Marcus looked at the tissues, looked at Jake, looked at the parking lot. Then he grabbed the pack, tore it open, and pressed a wad of tissues against his chin. His jaw tightened when the pressure hit, but he didn't make a sound. Here's what nobody tells you about Jake Creswell. The man had done 9 combat deployments. He'd been in rooms where the only way out was through someone. He'd carried teammates who couldn't walk and left enemies who couldn't breathe. But the thing that haunted him, the thing that woke him up at 0300 with his sheets soaked, wasn't gunfire. It was a boy in Kandahar, 12 years old, same size as Marcus. Jake's team had found him hiding in a compound after a raid, and by the time they got him to a medic, it was too late. The boy had been bleeding for hours. 3 stitches would have saved him. Jake carried that math in his chest for 8 years. So when he saw Marcus Webb bleeding on a bench in Fayetteville, North Carolina, he didn't keep walking. "Who did that to you?" Jake asked. Marcus didn't answer. "You don't have to tell me. But whoever did it might come back, and you're sitting in the open." Marcus processed that. His eyes moved to the street, then back to Jake. "Big dude. Dale something. I asked him for money and he didn't like it." Jake's expression didn't change, but his right hand closed into a fist for half a second, then opened again. "You out here alone?" "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." Marcus pulled the tissues away from his chin. The bleeding had mostly stopped, but the cut was ugly, a jagged line that would scar bad without stitches. He looked at Jake for a long time, sizing him up. "I swear this happened. A 12-year-old homeless kid stared down a Delta Force operator and tried to figure out if this guy was safe, and Jake let him. Didn't fidget, didn't check his phone, didn't fill the silence with reassurance. He just stood there, open hands, steady eyes, and let the boy decide. "I don't got anybody," Marcus finally said. "If that's what you're asking." Jake sat down on the opposite bench. Not next to Marcus, across from him, giving him space and a clear exit path to the left. "When's the last time you ate?" Marcus shrugged. "Yesterday. Maybe." Jake picked up his paper bag. "There's a Waffle House 2 blocks that way. I'm going to get food. You can come or you can stay. Either way, I'm bringing you back something." He stood up and started walking, didn't look back, didn't wait for an answer. He was 60 yards down the sidewalk when he heard sneakers slapping pavement behind him. Marcus fell into step 5 feet to his left, keeping distance, keeping his exit options open. Smart kid. They walked into the Waffle House and Marcus's whole body changed. His shoulders dropped an inch. The warmth and the smell of bacon grease hit him and something behind his eyes shifted. Jake saw it. He pointed to a booth by the window. "Sit anywhere you want." Marcus took the booth. Jake sat across from him. The waitress came over, mid-50s, name tag said Donna, had seen everything twice. She looked at Marcus's chin and opened her mouth. "He fell off his bike," Jake said. "We're handling it. Can he get a waffle, scrambled eggs, bacon, hash browns, scattered, smothered, and covered, and a large orange juice?" Marcus stared at him. "I didn't say what I wanted. You want something different?" Marcus paused. "No, that's good. Okay then." Jake ordered coffee for himself. Donna walked away. "Now listen. This is where most people think the story goes soft. Guy buys kid a meal, drives him to the police station, files a report, the system takes over. That's not what happened. Not even close." While they waited for food, Jake asked questions, short ones, specific. The kind of questions a guy asks when he's building an intelligence picture, not making conversation. Where was Marcus sleeping? How long had his mother been gone? Did he know his father? Had he been in school? Did anyone know where he was? The answers came back like a damage report. Sleeping behind the Dollar General, mother gone 11 days, father unknown. Last attended school 7 months ago in another county. Nobody on earth knew where Marcus Webb was sitting right now. Jake's jaw tightened. He wrapped both hands around his coffee mug and squeezed until his knuckles went pale. The food came. Marcus ate with the controlled speed of someone who'd learned that eating too fast made you sick, but not eating fast enough meant someone might take the plate. He cleared everything in 9 minutes. Jake watched and sipped coffee. "More?" Jake asked. Marcus shook his head, then changed his mind and nodded. Jake flagged Donna. Another round. Marcus ate the second plate slower. Color came back to his face. He sat up straighter. "What do you do?" Marcus asked. First question the boy had initiated. "Army," Jake said. "You kill people?" Jake set his coffee down. "I solve problems." That's not an answer. And right there, trust me on this. Jake Creswell realized this kid was sharp. Not just street smart, which he clearly was, genuinely, dangerously intelligent, the kind of kid who'd survive things that would break most adults, not because he was tough, but because he saw through everything. "Sometimes the problems don't want to be solved," Jake said. "So yeah, Marcus nodded. No shock, no judgment. He'd grown up in a world where violence was a tool, not a concept. Jake paid the bill. They walked outside and stood in the parking lot, and Jake faced the hardest decision he'd made since a rooftop in Mosul. He could call the authorities. He could drive this boy to social services and let the system run. And Marcus would be in a group home by nightfall, and he'd run within a week, and he'd be back on the streets, and the next Dale Rickers might do more than shove him. Or Jake could do something unauthorized. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Right there in the Waffle House parking lot, Marcus standing 5 feet away listening to every word Jake called a woman named Terry Booth. Terry was a retired Army nurse who'd served at Womack Army Medical Center for 20 years. She ran an unofficial network, military spouses and veterans who took in kids when the system was too slow or too broken. No, this is what you need to understand. This wasn't a registered foster program. This was a shadow network, off the books, built on trust and phone calls and people who'd rather break rules than watch kids fall through cracks. Terry, it's Jake. I've got a situation. Male, 12, no guardian, no placement, needs medical and a bed tonight. Can you take him? Marcus's eyes went wide. He took a step backward. Jake saw it. Hold on, Terry. Jake lowered the phone. I'm not turning you in. I'm not calling the cops. Terry is a friend. She has a house, spare room. She'll stitch your chin and feed you breakfast tomorrow. No locked doors. You can leave whenever you want. Why? Marcus asked. Because somebody should have done this a long time ago and nobody did. Marcus stood in that parking lot, bleeding through tissue paper. 80 pounds of survival instinct telling him to run. He didn't run. Okay, he said. Jake drove him to Terry Booth's house. It was a 2-story place on a quiet street near the base, with a garden out front and a porch light that was always on. Terry met them at the door. She was 61, built sturdy, silver hair pulled back, and she took one look at Marcus's chin and walked him straight to the kitchen table, where she had a first aid kit that could stock a field hospital. She cleaned the wound, closed it with butterfly strips and surgical tape, and had the boy sitting on a couch with a blanket and the TV remote in under 20 minutes. Jake pulled Terry into the hallway. He's been on his own at least 2 weeks. Mother's gone, possibly using. No father in the picture. He needs more than a night. Terry crossed her arms. Jake, you know I can only do temporary. If he stays more than a week without paperwork, I'm exposed. I'll handle the paperwork. You? You deploy in 3 weeks. Jake's jaw set. I'll handle it. Now here's where the story accelerates. And honestly, this is where most people would have let it end. Kid gets a bed, soldier feels good about himself, everyone moves on. But Jake Creswell didn't operate that way. When he committed to a mission, he committed all the way through. The next morning, Jake showed up at Terry's house at 0700. Marcus was awake, sitting at the kitchen table, eating cereal. He'd showered. His hair was combed. He was wearing clean clothes Terry had pulled from a donation bin. He looked, for the first time in weeks, like a kid. Get your shoes on, Jake said. Where are we going? You'll see. They drove to the Cumberland County Department of Social Services. Marcus froze in the passenger seat when he saw the building. I'm not going in there. Yes, you are. And I'm going in with you. No kidding. Jake Creswell walked into that building with the authority of a man who'd breached harder doors. He went straight to the intake desk, identified himself by rank and unit, presented his military ID, and told the caseworker he wanted to initiate an emergency temporary guardianship petition for an unaccompanied minor. The caseworker blinked. Sir, that's not typically how this works. I understand how it typically works. I'm telling you how it's going to work today. It took 4 hours. 4 hours of paperwork, interviews, background checks, phone calls. Marcus sat in a plastic chair in the hallway for most of it, knees up, back against the wall, watching the door. Old habits. But every 45 minutes, Jake came out and checked on him, brought him a Coke from the vending machine, told him what was happening, treated him like a person, not a case number. By 1400, Jake had filed for emergency custody. Terry Booth was listed as temporary placement, The county assigned a social worker. The gears started turning. But Jake wasn't done. You hear me? He was not done. That evening he drove back to Bragg Boulevard. He parked outside the pawn shop where Marcus had been shoved. He walked into 3 businesses on that block, asking one question: where do I find Dale Rickers? The first 2 people shook their heads. The third, a woman behind the counter of a check-cashing place, pointed down the street. He drinks at the Rusty Nail most nights. Sits in the back. Jake walked into the Rusty Nail at 2100. It was a dark bar, sticky floors, 3 pool tables, the kind of place where fights were entertainment. He spotted Dale Rickers immediately. Big man in the back booth, 2 empties in front of him, watching a NASCAR replay on the TV above the bar. Jake sat down across from him. Dale looked up. Help you? You pushed a kid yesterday, on the sidewalk outside the pawn shop. Split his chin open. Dale's expression didn't change. Kid was begging. I don't do begging. Jake placed both hands flat on the table. His fingers were relaxed. His breathing was even. Everything about his posture said calm. But Dale, who'd been around dangerous men his whole life, saw something in Jake's eyes that made him sit up straighter. That kid is 12, Jake said. So? Shouldn't be on the street hassling people. Jake leaned forward. Just 2 inches. You're going to listen to me right now, and you're going to hear every word. If you touch that boy again, or any kid on this street, I will come back here. And the conversation won't be this polite. Dale's hand moved under the table. Jake saw the shift in his shoulder. In one motion, Jake's left hand shot across the table, grabbed Dale's right wrist and pinned it to the wood. The movement was so fast that Dale's beer bottles rattled. Jake held the grip for 3 seconds, applying pressure to a point that made Dale's fingers go numb. Then he let go. Dale pulled his hand back, shaking feeling into his fingers. His face had gone white. We clear? Jake asked. Dale nodded. Jake stood up, walked out, didn't buy a drink, didn't look back. The bartender and 4 regulars watched him leave, and not one of them said a word. That's the thing about guys from the unit. They don't make threats, they make promises. And everybody in that bar understood the difference. 2 days later, Jake enrolled Marcus in school. Lakeview Middle School, 7th grade. Marcus hadn't been in a classroom in 7 months, and he walked through those doors gripping the straps of a new backpack Jake had bought him, shoulders tight, chin still taped up, looking ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble. But here's what happened. And this part still gets me. Marcus sat down in his first class, English, and the teacher, a woman named Mrs. Delgado, put a reading comprehension test in front of him. Standard assessment to see where he was at. The test was designed for 7th graders. Marcus finished it in 15 minutes and scored at a 10th grade level. Mrs. Delgado called Jake that evening. This kid is reading 3 grades ahead. Where has he been? Learning the hard way, Jake said. Over the next 2 weeks, Jake built a structure around Marcus's life. Wake up at 0630. Breakfast with Terry. School bus at 0730. After school, Jake picked him up 3 days a week and took him to the base gym. Not to work out, to sit in the lobby with his homework while Jake trained, then dinner, then reading, then bed. Marcus fought it at first. He tested every boundary, stayed out past curfew, skipped a day of school, talked back to Terry, normal kid stuff amplified by years of chaos. Every time, Jake responded the same way, calm, direct, consistent, no yelling, no threats, just consequences and follow-through. One night, Marcus pushed hard. He came back to Terry's house at 2300, 3 hours past curfew. Jake was sitting on the porch. Where were you? Jake asked. Out. That's not an answer. It's the one you're getting. Jake stood up. He walked down the porch steps and stood in front of Marcus. Not looming, not aggressive, present. Here's how this works. You can walk away right now. Nobody's going to chase you. Nobody's going to force you to stay. But if you walk through that door, you're agreeing to the deal. You follow the rules. You go to school. You do the work. That's it. Simple. Marcus stared at the street, then at Jake. His fists were clenched at his sides. His chin trembled, not from cold, from something deeper. "Why do you care?" Marcus asked, and his voice cracked on the last word. "Nobody ever cares. They pretend for a while and then they leave. My mom, the foster people, everybody. They all leave, and this is the moment. Pay attention." Jake Creswell, a man who'd stared down insurgents, who'd operated in the darkest corners of the world without flinching. This man sat down on the porch step, put his elbows on his knees and looked at the ground. "I lost a kid once," Jake said quietly. "Overseas. He was your age. I was 20 feet away and I couldn't get to him fast enough. I think about him every day." He looked up at Marcus. "I can't fix that, but I can be here, and I'm not leaving." Marcus stood there for 10 seconds that felt like an hour. Then he walked up the steps, opened the door, and went inside. He never broke curfew again. 3 weeks later, Jake deployed. Before he left, he sat Marcus down at Terry's kitchen table. He handed him a cell phone, prepaid, basic, no games. "My number's the only one in there. You call me if you need anything. I might not answer right away, but I will call you back. Every time." Marcus took the phone. He turned it over in his hands. "How long?" 90 days. Maybe less." "And you're coming back?" "I'm coming back." Jake deployed to a location that still doesn't have a name on any map. And for 93 days, Marcus went to school, did his homework, ate dinner with Terry, and called Jake every Sunday at exactly 1900. Sometimes Jake answered from a plywood shack. Sometimes from the back of a vehicle. Sometimes the call didn't connect, and Marcus would get a text 12 hours later, "Sorry. Busy. I'm good. How'd the math test go? Listen to me." Those text messages saved that kid. Not the food, not the bed, not the school. The texts. Because every single one of them proved the same thing. Somebody remembered he existed. Marcus's grades didn't just improve, they exploded. By the end of the first semester, he was on the honor roll. Mrs. Delgado moved him into advanced English. His math teacher requested he be tested for the gifted program. The kid who'd been sleeping behind a Dollar General was now writing essays that made his teachers stop and read them twice. But the system was closing in. Social services needed a permanent placement. Terry's temporary arrangement was stretching past its legal limit. A caseworker named Patricia Holt showed up at the house and told Terry they had 30 days to identify a permanent guardian, or Marcus would enter the foster care system. Terry called Jake. He was somewhere in the Middle East. The connection was bad. She told him the situation. There was a long pause. Static on the line. "File for me," Jake said. "Jake, you're single, you're active duty, you deploy constantly. They'll never approve it. File for me, Terry. I'll handle the rest." Jake Creswell came home 11 days early. I don't know what he said to his commanding officer. I don't know what favors he called in. I don't know what he traded. But the man walked off a C-17 at Pope Army Airfield, drove straight to the Cumberland County Courthouse, and filed a petition for legal guardianship of Marcus Webb. The hearing was 3 weeks later. Jake showed up in his class, a uniform, every decoration on his chest, a folder of documents an inch thick, character references from his commanding officer, his sergeant major, Terry Booth, Mrs. Delgado, Marcus's school counselor. A statement from a child psychologist who'd evaluated Marcus and noted, in clinical language, that the boy had formed a secure attachment to Jake Creswell, and that disrupting it would cause significant harm. The judge was a woman named Constance Rowe. She'd been on the family court bench for 22 years. She'd seen every kind of custody case. She read the file, looked at Jake, looked at Marcus sitting in the front row, and asked one question. "Master Sergeant Creswell, you understand that guardianship of a minor is a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week commitment that doesn't pause for deployments, training rotations, or classified operations?" Jake stood up. "Yes, ma'am. I've already submitted paperwork to transition to a non-deployable training assignment at the JFK Special Warfare Center. Effective next month." The courtroom shifted. "You need to understand what that means." Jake Creswell voluntarily gave up his position in Delta Force, the most elite unit in the United States military, a job that defined everything he was, to take a training role, a desk job with field exercises. Because a 12-year-old boy needed somebody to come home every night, Judge Rowe approved the guardianship. Marcus Webb, 12 years old, formerly sleeping behind a dumpster, officially had someone responsible for him. For the first time in his life. They walked out of the courthouse together. Marcus was carrying a manila envelope with a court order inside. He held it with both hands against his chest. They got to the truck. Jake opened the passenger door. Marcus stopped. "Jake, yeah, does this mean I'm your kid?" Jake looked at him. And the man who'd kept his composure in firefights, in ambushes, in moments where most humans would collapse. His eyes went red. He blinked twice, cleared his throat. "Yeah, Marcus. That's what it means." Marcus got in the truck. Jake closed the door, walked around to the driver's side and stood there for a moment with his hand on the door handle, breathing. Then he got in and drove them home. Over the next 4 years, Marcus didn't just survive. He thrived. Freshman year, honor roll every quarter. Sophomore year, varsity track. The kid was fast, the kind of fast that made coaches whisper to each other. Junior year, AP classes, National Honor Society. He wrote an essay for a statewide competition about resilience, and he won. Stood on a stage in Raleigh and read his words to 500 people, and Jake sat in the third row with his hands clasped, jaw tight, not blinking. Senior year, Marcus applied to 4 colleges, got into 3, full scholarship to NC State. Now here's the part that brings this whole thing full circle. And I promise you this is true. On the day Marcus graduated high school, Jake was in the audience. Terry Booth was there. Mrs. Delgado was there. Half of Jake's former team showed up, bearded guys in suits that didn't quite fit, clapping too loud, making the other parents nervous. Marcus walked across the stage, took his diploma, and looked directly at Jake. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He gave one short nod, a soldier's acknowledgement, the kind of nod that says more than a speech ever could. After the ceremony, they stood in the parking lot. Marcus in his cap and gown, Jake in a blazer he'd clearly bought that week. Marcus said, "You kept your word. That's it. 4 words." And Jake nodded. And they stood there for a moment in a parking lot in Fayetteville. 2 people who'd found each other on a broken sidewalk and refused to let go. If this story hit you somewhere real, subscribe. 1 click. That's it. We tell stories here about people who show up when nobody else will. Now let me tell you what happened after. Marcus went to NC State, studied criminal justice, made the dean's list 6 semesters in a row. During his junior year, he started volunteering with a non-profit in Fayetteville that worked with homeless youth. He spent weekends driving the same streets where he'd once slept, handing out supplies, talking to kids who looked the way he used to look. Jake retired from the Army with 22 years of service. He took a job consulting for a private security firm, hours that let him be home by dinner. He kept the house Terry had helped him buy. The porch light stayed on, and here's the end of it. The part that makes this whole thing a legend. Marcus graduated college at 22. 3 months later, he got hired by the Cumberland County Department of Social Services, same building where Jake had marched in and demanded emergency custody 7 years earlier. Same hallway where Marcus had sat in a plastic chair with his knees to his chest. His first day on the job, Marcus walked in and stopped at the intake desk. The same desk where Jake had stood and told a caseworker how things were going to work. Marcus put his hand on the counter and stood there for a moment. Then he went to his office, opened his case files and got to work. His first case was a 13-year-old boy with no guardian, no placement, and a split lip. Marcus picked up the phone. Jake Creswell didn't save a kid on a sidewalk in Fayetteville. He built a man, and that man went back and stood in the same broken spot where he'd fallen, and made sure the next kid who hit the ground had someone to pick him up. That's the legend. That's the whole story. And it started because one operator on one random afternoon chose not to keep walking.